we'll cover what is a policy brief. It's a concise, standalone document. There's a typo there. I apologize for that. I think I was probably thinking about cussing because policies just gets me so excited. On a particular issue requiring attention, that it obviously explains the urgency of the issue. It conveys what that is. It's supposed to give policy recommendations or implications on the issue. You know, recommendations about what we should do, implications on what can happen if nothing's done or if not enough is done. The evidence, that evidence base, which you've heard Jill and I and Highlighter is going to go over and over again behind that issue, and then points to the reader on additional issues on this issue, additional resources on this issue. And there's just a little graphic there. It says, can you come back with that 3-year study summarized in 6 bullet points on a PowerPoint? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I have an update.
Okay.
The National Adapt went to Washington, D.C. for an action 2 weeks ago.
It was awesome.
Somebody
was there, were they?
It was made the news. It made the news.
100 people total were there. It was a low count. And the first day we had a fun run in the Upper Senate Park. The second day, 76 people were arrested in the rotunda around that monstrous structure called Mountain of Flowers. And the real, the substance of this action was reading from the HHS, the regs that they've been installing, regs that would define community-based, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is very complicated, very complex, and we've run the publishing of these regs earlier than they had projected during this action. This means that we can take it state by state now. There's only 3 or 4 states that have chosen this option. And now it's wide open. We hope to get Texas to take it on too. This is what we call a legislative vehicle to carry our issue all the way and eliminate the institutional bias in our health care delivery system. We think it's a story.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's what's so hard about policy briefs, and I don't have a lot of experience writing them, but even just reading them, it's because you get so much information that people have spent. Because I know when you write one, it can take a long time.
Right.
So it takes a long time to put it together from the standpoint of the person who already knows all about the issue.
Right.
And then I think that's why it's so hard to write a really good one, is because it's hard to get all that complexity jammed in. That's the challenge, I think.
Right.
We're here to listen, but that's the complexity. I think it's taking all that stuff and years of work, condensing it into something that somebody's going to pick up and go, oh yeah, now I get it.
When we work in that, exactly, it's really hard. And then you say, and you find yourself, or I guess in my experience, going, well, no, I need to include that because I need to understand that. No, this is a really good piece of evidence. So I need to have this in, but it does need to be and short and concise. So this kind of talks about a policy brief as a memo versus using a policy brief as a publication. When it's more used as a memo, it can be more internally focused, demand-driven, provide a general overview of the subject, showing multiple points of view or opinions, and it might give multiple competing solutions. Versus using it as a publication where it's externally focused, supply-driven, broadly targeted, probably to meet more audiences, focuses on research that supports the main argument of the brief, and gives a strong, clear policy recommendations. And we like to have those in bullet points that are pretty specific.
And I think that's really important because, especially when you have a lot of content, and I would suggest even with this one, which is this is an issue I knew nothing about, but I suddenly feel I know a lot about.
Yeah.
But I think as you move into the Texas legislative session, you're going to need a section that's very specific about on, you know, House Bill 1 or whatever it is. That piece is so important because these people are often very busy. That specific piece of what you exactly want them to do and take away from it can be really important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. So the context of a policy brief helps define the audience for a policy brief in both terms of who's. Okay, sorry. I haven't looked at this sentence in a while, so it kind of tripped me up again. But when you would think about the context of developing a policy brief, you want to think about who's being targeted and how they perceive the issue, and questions you want to keep in mind, like how much do they already know? Again, like Holly's talking about, maybe that can help you kind of streamline some information. How open are they to your message, and what questions or answers need clarification? Maximum of 2 to 4 pages. I would even say 1 to 3. Even Hill staff get a lot of information. A lot of times people are dropping off things to them and emailing things to them all the time, and so it needs to be very concise, and you know, there's something that they can look at or show their bosses, and they need to be able to sum up as well in just a few minutes. So it can have that executive statement, an introduction, results and conclusions, again, implications and recommendations, and references and useful sources. So to kind of sum it all up, it needs to be evidence-based and engaging and contain those elements that we've kind of already talked about before in our presentations, with a persuasive argument, authority that gives credibility to the eyes of the policymaker, clear, concise writing and graphs. It doesn't need to be just all text. You got to throw in some pictures and some charts and graphs. Go ahead and source those wherever possible. Again, as Jill was just telling me to say, that plagiarism is the kindest form of flattery. So use resources and information that's already out there to go ahead and plug in your brief and source them. Make it engaging to your audience and specify it for them. And actionable. Again, include those policy recommendations. So I don't have many slides on it. I guess maybe I can just kind of talk about, oh, go ahead.
What about, I mean, you mentioned, you know, graphs and some things. I would think that aesthetics plays a big part in it, since they do get a lot of material.
Yes.
Especially, like, if we relate it to, like, resumes, you know, a lot of people sit through and they see, oh, this one looks pretty. What about highlighting, underlining, bolding, italicizing, all of that?
Absolutely. I was just going to actually just go through that, and maybe, Holly, did you have the ESCA? Maybe one in color? Or if not in color, that's fine. I think I do have it in color.
If you were talking about secondary target,
Yes.
that's how it worked out on this trip.
Good.
The arrests were at the Hill, and the Health and Human Services finally did what they were stalling for months and months. Stop bragging.
There we go. Okay. So this is actually intended to be a fact sheet more so than a policy briefing. Maybe I can make the view a little smaller. So, oh, that's too small. Well, you can't read the text.
That's okay, I have parts of the text blown up on my part.
Oh, okay, there you go. Very good. So this is actually a fact sheet that we used at the Advocacy Summit. One of our priorities was including health education and physical we want health education and physical education as core academic subjects when ESEA is reauthorized. So this is a fact sheet that we put together, but the elements are really the same, like using colors for front and back. We kind of broke it up into categories. We have background, we have facts here, evidence to support our issue, but we actually put like our request or our ask at the very front. It's a little bit better when you have like the whole context, but bold and underline, like here's our request. Specifically Congress should, and have those, you see how those are standing out with the color contrast and the background, and they're absolutely at the very beginning, because at least we want you to take that away. If you don't read all of our lovely facts and statistics on the front, and then here on the back of our more, you know, we actually want you to, at least in the 2 seconds or 2 minutes that you're going to look at it, sometimes at least take that away from it, your takeaways.
And that's the very bottom of the gray. I hadn't noticed it before. before, I pulled this up again, but in the bottom there, it says that this was put together by the National Coalition of Health Education Organizations,
Yep.
which is a bunch of organizations, and so it just kind of gave that oomph, like, to remind them that, hey, this really just wasn't about one person, or this wasn't about 6 people in the room, this was about ADAPT of Texas, and ADAPT is a national organization,
right.
This is about SOPI and APHA, and AHI, and a bunch of other organizations committed to health education, so I think that was I just noticed that this week that they have that little
right.
down there.
That blurb is actually very important. when you're working in coalitions, we actually revised that blurb for this year in 2012 like 3 different times to make sure that some organizations were included, other ones weren't if they didn't contribute to this. But most importantly, and I know it's very small, we probably need to do, when we talk about our speeches, we actually say this, but those 7 organizations are advocating on behalf of over 35,000 people. So again, like as Holly said, and letting you know, it's not just 7 people or the people who are in front of you. Like, we're bringing you these messages and these facts on behalf of all of the people that are represented throughout these organizations. So yes, you definitely want to give context to the things you very much want highlighted. I like bolding things and underlining things. Again, these go through so much review, especially if it's a coalition. I'm not sure, Jill, when you do your policy briefs, how many layers of review, but I like things bolded, I like things underlined, but when you go through 7 organizations of looking at them, not all the facts you want may get presented. The background may have to be concise a little bit, but what everybody needs to really be an agreement on are those policy recommendations. Is there an ask? Do we vote yes or no? What do you want to come from this? Why are we having this policy brief on this issue? And so yes, I like things to stand out a little more. When I worked on the Hill, and people would bring these to me. That's why I say I like to source all of your information, especially if you use like graphics. And we have here, the way we form our basic facts is, according to, and then we say this report, or, based on this recent information from the CDC, so at least I know, where you got it from. Because sometimes if you want to get the information in, but it's too short to have like your whole little reference list on the back, you kind of at least want to frame your facts so people know that they're evidence-based, and then you just didn't pull them out of your hat. I know that 30% of people like fluorescent lights versus, light bulbs. It just, you need to make sure that you're giving the context to that.
Yeah, we actually use footnotes. And I'm not advocating.
Yeah, in the event that you can.
I'm not advocating for them one way or the other, but for our organization, because we're considered a science-based, science development organization, they expect that from us. They really want to know the citation, because they often use then that. They want to continue the fact. They want to know where it comes from. I don't think there's other organizations. It's not as important. It may just be, but yes, giving that, citing as best you can where you got the information. Like I said, and we find for us footnotes work. I don't think I think you can go either way on that.
Yeah, you can go either way. I mean, it just depends on the length of it. As you saw, when we did 3 of these, and again, with going through so many people, and how...
Actually, the question about graphics, I do think graphics work.
Yes.
A really good example is our sodium one. I mentioned earlier the 70% of processed and restaurant food. We actually show that with a graphic of a salt shaker that shows, the percentage. I do think that there is something about visuals. Because some of us are more visual.
Yes.
So we try to use them where we can. We just don't have the resources to have a good graphics department. So if we can borrow them from others or something like that, we try to include them if we can.
Right. And again, this is intended more to be a fact sheet versus a brief, but again, those elements are the same, and this is why we didn't use as many graphics here when we use these for the summit. But again, they do need to be aesthetically pleasing so people can look at them, and that's why we print them in color. When we give them to our participants, they're in black and white to save just a little bit of money on printing, but when we put them in our Hill packets, we do present them this way. And just like she said, when I worked on the Hill and people bought these in, I actually did literally pull information from policy briefs, and especially if they were well sourced, because that was a question I'd always get from my supervisor and my boss is, how current is this information? Where exactly did it come from? And I needed to make sure that I saw the source myself before I put in any background information or talking point that I was going to turn over to my member of Congress, one of the last things you want to do is give non-factual information. And just so happens your policy brief was so great that they used it in a speech on the House floor, they used it on the hearing, and then it comes back and it's like, wait, that's not even true. And that's happened before. In some extreme cases, I'm not going to call any names, but a totally incorrect statement was made about Planned Parenthood not too long ago about 99% of their services are doing this, and that was just not correct at all. But apparently somebody had given that policymaker that information. He found it compelling enough to say it on the House floor, and it was not true. It probably wasn't a good day for his staff when he got back to the office, and especially since it made such national news. Very good tools. Oh, sorry, we have a question in the back.
Don't you feel kind of like you're at their mercy when they lie that way? What can you do?
Okay.
Not that I should be clarifying for him, but I think he might be coming to the same conclusion I was, which is maybe that was purposeful, just to throw something out there and see
how much attention he could get.
You can't just keep calling each other liars.
Well, maybe that's why maybe that's part of why we're all here, is to learn how to do, so sometimes the counterattack is like in that case,
maybe so.
The counterattack could have been really effective, is to say, to whip out a policy brief that said no.
Right, and some evidence-based.
Boom, boom, boom. And so sometimes I think that with that misinformation, the more we can put out accurate information in ways that are easy for the public to understand.
Right.
A lot of times people, I think, swallow that stuff just because that's what's put in front of them.
Right.
But when they get something that's put in front of them that's better written and better information, it may be.
Right.
You said something very critical there. That is another observation I've had in this field. Easily digestible. So when you think about the facts that you're going to use, step back from your own facts for a moment and think about it in terms of what other people can digest. So if I told you that if we do this, it'll save the system $3 billion, versus if I tell you, if I avoid one heart attack, I save $60,000. Oh yeah, and I can stop 50,000 heart attacks. You know what I mean? Think about it also in terms of, sometimes in public health in particular, we use facts that aren't digestible, that aren't easy to understand, that almost begin to boggle the mind. 1 point whatever, quadrillion dollars and this many deaths. That's good information to have as well. There's sometimes the overall system needs to know what the overall system will benefit from that information, but it's sometimes hard to digest numbers that are that large. Bringing it down to the individual level and what the individual benefits, and I thought about that as well in this fact sheet. Again, there's a lot. This was really great for background, but what will this program really mean for an individual person, and what could be the benefits of that program to the individual? If you can get that to a factual level, what the true benefit is, and again, a very digestible way that I can understand. That can also, and that you clicked with me when you said that about easily digestible. That is so crucial when it comes to writing these as well.
Right.
You can keep repackaging.
Pardon?
You have to keep repackaging.
Yeah.
Well, right,
So.
and that's what I mentioned in my presentation. It does need to be packaged for legislators, and not to say they're not the smartest people in the world, because some of them are. But again, they have many issues in their portfolio, so it does need to be packaged for them, so their staff can easily relay it, and so that they can easily relay it to other constituents, or that they can relay it when they're again in hearings or doing speeches as well. It does need to be on that level. We get so tied up in our own jargon and our own, in public health or health in general, we have acronyms for everything. Policy briefs are not the time or the place to do that, to make it seem like we're talking to ourselves. You have to think about keeping it broad enough for your audience. You want to practice, as Holly mentioned, and she's going to talk about a little bit more, you want to practice your elevator speeches when you're using your policy briefs. You also need to be able, you're putting it there and you look at it so much and you probably have it memorized, but you need to also be able to summarize it in words, not just looking at it when you're in offices or when you're talking to other stakeholders as well. And I lost my train of thought of something else I was going to say to go along with that. maybe it'll come back to me. To the best of your ability, make your policy briefs or any other materials. I meant to say this during my presentation, but everything that you do, make it public. Again, because you're not just educating policymakers, you are educating the public and community in general. So whatever, whether it's policy briefs, whether it's fact sheets, whether it's policy analysis, make all of that information public and easily readable. Just in case you give this to me in an office and I'm getting 50 of these a day and I have to use it, I accidentally lose it under a pile of papers and I'm doing a speech for my boss and I was like, wait, what was that statistic again that I just saw? You know, so maybe I remembered who bought it in. I remember that Holly bought it in. I have Holly's card and know she's at UTEP. So, I need to be able to find that information for myself. Oh, the thought that I was going to. So along with practicing your elevator speech, and this comes up during our advocacy workshops, is maybe timing when to give it. Maybe Jill can elaborate on this as well. But you want to have that elevator speech down because, and this can go back and forth. Some people have better attention spans than others, but sometimes if you give someone a piece of paper, they're just like so mesmerized by it and they're looking at it and looking all around and maybe not listening to you. So maybe you want to practice kind of giving like an overview. Get your message out, get your ask out, get your spiel out, then you hand over materials and let people look over, so they're not so like glazed over while you're sitting up there talking. Has this worked for you? And
yeah, how we even have to approach that, it goes to that great point earlier about storytelling. We often, before we give the policy brief in a meeting with a member, which I know we're getting a little bit beyond policy briefs, more about meetings, is we complement the facts with the story and then move to the, oh yeah, and here's your information you're going to need to give to your boss or make a decision or whatever after. So if we're going after NIH funding for research, it might be, yeah, we have the researcher talk about why funding from NIH is important to biomedical research, followed by the person who says, I'm the kid who had the new valve put in because of research, and I'm the benefit that society, I'm one of the many people that's benefiting from medical research. Oh yeah, and here's the fact sheet to show you the economic benefit of NIH research, and here's the asks that we have in terms of action from you.
Right. Question?
Well, it was more like.
Okay.
So basically, what you're trying to do is humanize the issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Humanize it and make it actionable. Absolutely humanizing it is extremely important, and also though with policymakers, it really is, you've got to be very specific, they have very limited time. What do you want from them for this? What do you really want them to take away and do very specifically to pass this legislation or promulgate these regulations by such and such a date? Whatever it is, it's really being really specific about what you want.
Right.
Because they're not going to read between the lines. They're not going to guess. They're going to want to know exactly what they need to do.
Yeah, I think in our field and our work, we're very analytical, but you need to be direct and straight to the point. Direct, brief, and straight to the point. And information that you give them. So again, so maybe I can walk through how we kind of go through policy briefs and fact sheets. Again, we start with the issue. And usually these are done in a team of so many people. Sometimes I do this with like 3 or 4 other people at Sophie or at other offices that I've worked in. But somebody will have the background piece. Somebody will have the recommendations piece. Somebody will have the kind of what we called here basic fact sheets. And then somebody will kind of have the, maybe here's what you can do or here are the implications on this. So they don't need to be... it doesn't need to be a hard exercise to make a policy brief. Again, you have to consider who you are giving it to, so you don't have to rack your brain with making sure that you're including all of this hardcore jargon. It does need to be simplistic, but compelling and evidence-based at the same time. So if you just want to think about the points of the questions, I think I would go back to that, to the first slide, is that to have that in the back of your mind while you're drafting your policy briefs. Can somebody tell me in 2 minutes, what does it discuss? Why it's important, what recommendations have I made, and what evidence am I using to justify those recommendations? You want to start from there. When you're giving that evidence, you want to use those graphs to go with it. I am a person that likes bold and underline, so that's where my eyes are going to go first on a piece of paper. So if there's one particular statistic that you want me to take home, then that's what I would do. And again, when it comes to the recommendations, keep those kind of front and early, in case that people don't get to look at the whole front and back. At least then you can take away staring out at me, here's what I want you to do.
And this reminds us, it's kind of like in health education, we always say, write your evaluation plan at the same time you write your objectives. And that's, looking at that, it's kind of like, that's a great starting point for writing a policy brief, is just answering those, answering those 4 questions on a piece of paper.
Right, and then going from there,
and then go from there, and then expand and elaborate and make it something that you would share with people. But that's kind of like, I would start right there and say, before I try and
exactly, before I go, exactly.
Before I try and come up with something I can give to people, I need to be able to answer those questions real clearly and in easily digestible ways. So that's very helpful.
Exactly. Oh, sorry. Does anyone have any other questions? All right. So that was painful. That wasn't too, a little short and sweet. Okay. Didn't quite take an hour, but really that's what the point of what we wanted to get across to you when it's developing. Has anybody developed their own policy briefs in the room? No? Who's gonna go draft one after today? Thanks, yay!
So to follow up on that, I would be interested in a forum, like in kind of a working group, if we had some kind of an afternoon session where we'd invite people, maybe over a couple different topics, so that people who were working on specific issues could draft them, write them, get feedback, and just as we're sitting here and knowing that people are working on different issues, that might be very helpful to get. Sometimes it's that feedback from people who don't know your issue that can be really helpful. Exactly. As opposed to if you're working with 4 people who all do diabetes research or who all do tobacco research, they know the lingo, they know the jargon, they don't as frequently call you on something and say, you know what, I don't get that, or whatever you said, that makes no sense to me. And I think that's where a lot of policy briefs get lost, is they're written by the experts in a particular field, and they only make sense to the experts, not to everybody else who are the ones that we really want to be able to understand. So raise your hand if you're interested in doing that someday.
Can I add an element to that?
Absolutely.
Think about inviting an elected official to come in and at the end and do a little mini kind of meeting and use your policy brief.
Kind of like
role play.
The summit.
Yes, you do a role play.
Practice session.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make a comment because there were
meetings and workshops, and sometimes we get so inspired and so energized, and then we leave the room and go back to our everyday lives, and it's really hard to get caught up. But consistency is key. Consistency is very key, and so is cohesion on issues. Like if everybody's fighting about the same thing, then they need to be fighting together, not fighting separately. Absolutely. Any other comments, questions? Okay. I would like you to send me your policy briefs, please, after you, because everybody's homework assignment. Oh, yeah, please. No, yeah, you're not just getting rid of me after one day.
Actually, I do have one question. You had mentioned writing the opt-ed. I'm not familiar with that term. Is it similar or the same as a press release, or where can I get more information on how to write an opt-ed?
Great question, and I'm not sure, maybe I didn't talk about that. The Prevention Institute, if you go to preventioninstitute.org, and they have a policy toolkit on their site, and maybe it's on my.
And usually in any newspaper on the same page, the letters of the editor, you'll see the
editorial,
op-ed pieces, and you can read somebody else's, they'll say, like somebody can just write in, like you could write one, and kind of like a letter to the editor, but more of a column twist.
Yeah, they're normally invited. So think of ways that the public kind of communicates positions through newspapers. So you have regular news, right? And then you've got the opinion page. And there are normally 3 things on the opinion page. One is just letters to the editor. Anybody can write a letter to the editor, you just send it in. That's the one, just unsolicited, send it in. The other is obviously the opinions of the paper, the editor's opinion, right? So not every day, but a lot of times it'll be like the editor's, like an opinion page, like there's an upcoming referendum or election, and there'll be, this is how the editors of the newspaper feel about this. A lot of times candidate endorsements, or we think the Senate should vote yes on this bill. And then there's something in between, which the op-eds are sometimes invited, or sometimes you can send them in, and usually something that's, it's being represented, it's usually more lengthy. Letters that are usually short, 150, they're usually kind of short. Opinion editorials are not official editorials of the newspaper, so it's not from the actual editor, him or herself. It's usually an invited person from outside, or not necessarily invited. You could get, convince them to run one, but it's an opinion piece from somebody who's a non-editor of the paper, and it's longer than a letter to the editor, and it usually has this kind of information, facts, but it's an opinion. It'll go into the background on why it is that Medicaid is important to the citizens of Texas, and it'll say, and therefore, and it's usually it's often a leader or somebody of influence who has an understanding of the issue that says, and here's why I believe that the Senate should do this on the issue or something like that.
Right.
And I think a lot of times if you email, it's sort of like if you email the editor and say, I'd really like to write an opinion piece on this issue and give them just a few bullet points that you're going to cover, it doesn't always have to be an invited one. If you sell yourself to somebody that they think, hey, this would be interesting, and now that we've talked about it, pay attention the next couple days in the newspaper, and you'll notice that like a lot of people are getting that space and that time, and some of them are invited, but some of them initiated that contact themselves. So.
It's usually more controversial topics, things that are relevant in the news at the time where people are forming their opinions about the issue.
Right. And not necessarily written in this format, which is, I think, that's what, as Jill was saying, can be written like as a letter, but more so in a story kind of format.
Story is trying to be persuasive. I mean, persuasive in a narrative form. It's
right.
different than this.
It's
It's trying to lay out the problem, the solution. It's to change people's opinion about an issue.
Mm-hmm. Some that grab my attention, just like reading the ones on CNN, will be where people will post on, or I guess those are more blogs, not necessarily a newspaper.
Those are getting similar though.
Those are very, very similar. And some of the ones that catch my attention are obviously the titles of them. Actually, if they are a little bit more controversial, that's going to make me click on the link on the website to read them more anyway. And then they'll start off with, so I was walking around my neighborhood and saw this, and this. This is a problem and here's why. And then they go into a narrative kind of form like that. But I brought this out because Prevention Institute, if you go on their policy toolkit website, they recommend that op-eds are about 500 to 600 words. PreventionInstitute.org. I can actually just give this to you, or even make copies or whatever. I printed it out to keep it for myself, but you're more than welcome to have it because it's online. But they recommend keeping it between 500 to 600. I think the general rule is 500 words is probably a page, right? Is that?
Yeah, normally on each website, and the website for the newspaper, even sometimes on the editorial page itself, it'll say how many words they allow for a letter to the editor or an op-ed or something. Right. But that's generally speaking, yes. Right. Each newspaper has its own rules.
Yep. Each newspaper has its own rules. They will print the disclaimer, these opinions are not necessarily reflective of XYZ paper or the editor or anything like that. But again, since it is your opinion, don't feel like you have to censor yourself or stay within certain lines that you would in like an advocacy or legislative. Like, feel free to use your own words to say what you want for your position statement. I guess I would say that. I mean, you don't want to probably not offend anybody or use harsh language. You can be controversial, but you can be tactfully controversial. Sometimes just the issue itself is controversial, not necessarily how you frame it. But if you go to, and I'm going to give you this, and you can look it up yourself to see. So Prevention Institute, and I use them as a frame of reference. Again, there are plenty of resources you could probably look up to tell you how to write an op-ed. And give you more points on policy brief, but they walk you through it, and they also do invite you to, after you write it, and if it's published, to come back and post it on their website because they're keeping track of it. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.